We are often told that the most dangerous threats in life arrive with a loud crash, that they come from the shadows of the unknown, or from people we have every reason to fear. But what if the greatest danger you could ever face was sitting at your own dinner table, smiling at your children, and pouring you a glass of wine? For 3 years, Arthur Sterling, a man whose name once commanded the respect of every boardroom on the East Coast, watched his 6-year-old son, Leo, slowly fade away. The boy was trapped in a gilded cage, his health stolen by a condition that the greatest medical minds in the country could not name. Arthur spent a fortune to keep his son alive, but while he looked for answers in sterile clinics and expensive laboratories, the truth was hidden in plain sight, tucked away in the soft, lavender-scented air of his own home. He had no idea that the person he trusted most was the one systematically erasing his son's future. It took a 3-year-old girl, the daughter of his new housekeeper, to notice the one thing every adult had walked past 1,000 times. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Arthur Sterling was not a man who believed in luck. He was a man of cold, hard logistics, a titan of industry who had built an empire from nothing. When his wife, Eleanor, passed away in a tragic accident, the world he had constructed began to fracture. His son, Leo, became the only tether he had to a life worth living. But shortly after the funeral, the boy began to weaken. It started with a loss of appetite and a lingering exhaustion that the doctors dismissed as grief. Then came the tremors, the terrifying moments where Leo's heart would struggle to find its rhythm, and the skin that once glowed with childhood vitality turned the color of parchment. Arthur hired the best pediatricians from across the globe, men and women who arrived with stacks of degrees and left with nothing but unanswered questions. The mansion, a sprawling estate of marble and glass, turned into a private hospital. Every window was a threshold Arthur guarded with his life, believing that if he could just buy enough time, he could outpace the illness that seemed to be consuming his son from the inside out. Living within the walls of this fortress was Clara, a woman who had arrived shortly after the tragedy to take charge of Leo's daily care. She was polished, educated, and possessed a quiet grace that seemed to suit the frantic energy of the household. She brought a sense of order to the chaos, carefully managing Leo's medication, his meals, and his rest. Arthur came to rely on her for everything. She was the one who filled the house with the scent of calming lavender, the one who whispered comforting words to Leo when the pain became too much, and the one who stood by Arthur's side at dinner, offering a sympathetic ear after his grueling days. To Arthur, Clara was a savior, a constant presence that kept the fragile remnants of his family from falling apart. He trusted her with the key to the private kitchen where she prepared Leo's specialized health drinks, a concoction she claimed was packed with the essential nutrients his body could no longer process on its own. He never once questioned why she insisted on total privacy for those specific tasks, assuming it was simply the professional dedication of a woman who cared deeply for his son. Into this quiet, carefully curated environment came Sarah, a young mother who had been widowed far too early. She brought her 3-year-old daughter, Lily, with her, a child who had learned to be quiet and observant in a world that had not always been kind to them. While Sarah scrubbed the floors and managed the household, Lily spent her days playing in the corners of the kitchen or sitting on the rug, whispering stories to her worn-out cloth doll. Lily was small, but she had a way of watching the world that was unsettling in its clarity. She learned the rhythm of the house as if she were reading a map. She knew which floorboards groaned under the weight of an adult step and which rooms were forbidden. But Lily was drawn to the 3rd floor, to the faint, rhythmic beeping that echoed through the vents like a bird trapped behind the walls. She was not afraid of the illness, she was only afraid for the boy who looked so lonely in that massive, sterile room. She began to sneak upstairs, pushed by an instinct that told her the boy needed someone to share a secret with. The bond that formed between Leo and Lily was fragile and silent. She would climb onto the edge of his bed, share half of a butter cookie, and sit with him while he struggled to breathe. But she noticed something that none of the adults had the heart to see. She saw the change that took hold of Leo whenever Clara brought the silver tray. She saw the boy's shoulders hunch, his eyes grow dim, and the way his stomach seemed to revolt against the thick, dark drink he was forced to consume. Lily did not know about medicine, and she did not know about the high-stakes games being played in the boardrooms of Boston. She only knew a simple, absolute truth: when Leo drank from that green glass, he began to hurt. She started watching Clara with the unblinking intensity of a child who had realized that not every adult was a protector. She watched as Clara would step out of the room to fetch a napkin, leaving the glass within reach. In those fleeting moments, Lily would move with the quiet precision of a ghost, tipping the liquid into the soil of a large, potted fern in the corner. The result was immediate and terrifying. The plant, once vibrant and lush, began to wither as if scorched from within, its leaves turning a sickly, jaundiced yellow. But Leo began to wake up. He started to laugh, a small, rusted sound that startled Arthur when he first heard it through the door. For the first time in years, the boy was asking for books, for stories, and for more time with his new friend. Arthur was baffled by the sudden improvement, attributing it to a miracle or a change in the air. He did not know that the change was occurring in a ceramic pot near the window. Clara, however, began to notice that the girl was always there. She noticed the way Lily looked at her feet, the way she clutched her doll, and the way the boy's health seemed to pulse in direct correlation with the child's presence. She began to harbor a cold, hard resentment toward the little girl, sensing that the fragile house of cards she had built was beginning to tremble. The turning point came on a Tuesday, in the dead of the night. Lily, unable to sleep, went looking for her lost doll and found the door to Leo's room standing ajar. She saw Clara in the moonlight, wearing a silk robe and performing a task that had nothing to do with medicine. She was replacing Leo's pillow with an identical one, tucking it carefully under his head as he slept. Lily, hiding behind a fern, saw Clara cradle the old pillow like a prize, her face devoid of the honeyed warmth she wore during the day. The next morning, Lily climbed into the bed while Leo slept. She tugged at the pillow, curious about the change, and felt a rough seam that didn't belong. When she finally pulled the stitching apart, a small, folded square of paper fell out, containing a pinch of white powder. It was not a treatment. It was something that felt cold in her small palm. She hid it in the pocket of her dress, her mind racing with a sense of duty she couldn't explain. When Arthur returned home, exhausted and carrying the weight of a dying business, he found the little girl waiting for him in the shadows. She didn't cry or ask for attention. She simply reached out, took his sleeve, and whispered that there was something wrong with Leo's pillow. When she held out the folded paper, the world stopped for Arthur Sterling. He knew the fold. He knew the danger. He had spent his life dealing with threats, but he had never expected to find one sewn into the soft stuffing beneath his son's head. He took the child to the room, opened the pillow in the dim light, and found dozens of the packets, enough to slowly drain the life out of a child day by day, year by year. His hands, which had navigated the most ruthless deals in the city, began to tremble. He realized then that for 3 years, he had been paying a woman to bury his son, and he had been inviting her to dinner every single night. The house became a stage for a silent, deadly performance. Arthur went about his business, keeping his face calm, his smiles practiced, and his kisses on Clara's temple just as they had always been. He turned his home into a tomb for her secrets, secretly bringing in his most trusted men to track every wire transfer and every call she made. The evidence began to pile up, revealing a network that reached all the way to his greatest rival in Boston. It wasn't just about money. It was a slow, methodical attempt to hollow him out, to take everything he loved until he was nothing more than a ghost in his own mansion. When the realization hit him, that the accident which took his wife had been no accident at all, the coldness he felt was absolute. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He simply began the work of ensuring that when the net finally closed, there would be no way out. The escape, when it came, was a nightmare of fire and darkness. The power was cut, the halls were filled with the sound of chaos, and the estate that was once a sanctuary became a battlefield. Arthur's final act as a father was to entrust his children to the secret tunnels he had once dismissed as a relic of the past. He watched as Sarah carried his son and the little girl into the blackness, his heart tearing in two as he stood alone to face the storm. He knew that if he didn't hold the line, none of them would survive the night. He heard the gunfire echo against the stones, the shouts of men who had come to finish what Clara had started, but he focused only on the image of the children disappearing into the earth. They were the ones who would carry the legacy, and they were the ones who had shown him that even in a house of stone, it was the smallest, softest voice that held the truth. The road back was not easy. It led them to the cold streets of Boston, to a confrontation that would rewrite the power dynamics of the coast, and to a reckoning that left no room for mercy. But when the dust settled, the truth was laid bare for the world to see. Clara and her associates would never again see a garden or walk in the sun as free people. They were dismantled by the very secrets they had tried to protect. Back at the estate, the spring finally arrived, and the rose bushes that had withered during the darkest years began to bloom once more. Arthur sat on the porch, watching Leo and Lily play in the sun, their fingers tangled together. He had learned that the most profound wisdom is often found in the quietest corners. He had spent millions on science and medicine, on guards and walls, but he had been saved by a child who was brave enough to stand in the light and point at the dark.